and welcome to Property Question Time, the show where you get to ask your property-related questions to our panel of industry experts. My name is Pia Jackson, and with me today we have Tony Gimple, co-founder of Less Tax for Landlords, Nicole Bremner, director of East 8, and Simon Law, chairman of the Society of Licensed Conveyancers. Thank you very much for joining us today. Now, Tony, we're going to start with you. The question is as follows. I own 2 properties. My husband died 9 years ago and we have no children. Both properties are in my sole name. When I die, I am going to be stung for inheritance tax. I need help in sorting out what I can do with the properties now to avoid my estate being hammered with 40% tax. Who do I consult? A solicitor doesn't seem to have the information I need, and an accountant wouldn't have the necessary legal knowledge. Apart from the 2 houses, I don't have any savings, so is it just a question of putting the houses in joint names? Although I have read in another forum that if they are not related to you, then the whole of the house comes into the final valuation. Help, please.
Spend the money.
That's a good answer. Spend the money.
Spend the money. It's not your problem, it's your beneficiary's problem. You don't have children, so that's probably going to go sideways, if not to charity. So you might as well have some fun with it whilst you can. If you are leaving it to charity, then inheritance tax doesn't apply. We each have £325,000, the nil rate band, which we can give free of inheritance tax. There's no inheritance tax between spouses, so it'll only become a problem on second death, and it will only be the excess above the combined nil rate bands, 650,000, which will be taxed at 40%. The real question here is who's going to inherit and why. And if it is family, you can always take the view that, well, they're going to be better off than we were at that point in time. It really is money for nothing. I'm prepared to pay the state protection racket to rob my grave. Alternatively, if you want them to inherit in its entirety, then you probably need to speak to somebody who specialises in estate planning.
Right, okay.
Which could be a solicitor, it could be a will writer, it could be an accountant, but they need to have that as a speciality. But don't sweat it.
Don't sweat it.
Enjoy the money.
Spend the money. Go live dangerously.
Absolutely.
Quite right. I agree with you. Okay, Nicole. The probate process following my mother's death is due to be complete next month. I am due to inherit 135,000 and am unsure how to manage or invest this wisely. I am married with 2 children and work full time. I don't necessarily want to pay off my remaining £109,000 mortgage. Each of my children aged 9 and 6 will also receive a monetary gift of £10,000 each, which I wish to save for them for when they are older. I'm not sure what the best options are. Everything seems like a minefield and is so overwhelming. Any help or advice would be gratefully received.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions there and a lot going on, and it's a very interesting point of time in your life with the young children and a mortgage, etc. I do think that the best person to speak to is going to be an IFA, an independent financial advisor, because they can look at your situation in its entirety. They can look at the tax implications as well of investing the funds that are coming into you. You have said that you don't want to pay off your mortgage, and perhaps that is the right thing not to do due to the very low interest rates, but have a think about how your life will be impacted if and when interest rates do rise in the future, and perhaps it's worth keeping a bit of a cash buffer available if they do rise and your lifestyle is impacted. With the children's funds, there are special wrappers available, or special products available for children that you can invest in their name. I believe they're very limited. Again, a good IFA will have much more knowledge than I do about those sorts of products. But it does seem that given that you have a very long-term time horizon, an IFA will be able to advise you with how much of that money to put into stocks and shares, how much into fixed income investments, how much into perhaps property, and the tax implications of perhaps paying down some of your mortgage or investing in some buy-to-let property. But your IFA is going to be the best person to speak to about that.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Nicole. Simon, I haven't owned a property for 35 years. Am I exempt from paying stamp duty on a property I am just about to buy for 300,000? If not, how much would I be paying if I sell my current house for approximately 450,000?
Bit of a strange question towards the end, but we'll take the
No.
first part of it.
Take the first part.
Which is referring to the wonderful headline-grabbing stamp duty first-time buyer abolition from the Chancellor this year. The fact that you've ever owned a property means that you're not a first-time buyer.
Yeah.
And they're quite strict on that definition. So strict, in fact, that if you have joint buyers buying and one of them has owned a property, you wouldn't qualify for the stamp duty relief either. So it's actually a very narrow section of the market that this is aimed at. Whilst it was a great headline grabber, it probably hasn't changed the marketplace.
No. Okay. And part two of that question is, if not, how much would I be paying if I sell my current house for approximately 450,000?
As long as you're replacing the main residence, then the stamp duty would be paid at the normal stamp duty rate. So as long as you're replacing the property that you live in with a new property, then that's fine. However, if you're buying an additional property and you're not replacing your main residence, then you would pay it at the higher rate. But this sounds as if it would be paid at the standard rate.
Okay.
And there's a set amount of time that you're allowed to hold the two properties and then sell off one and not
if you purchase a second property as your main residence and haven't sold your main one, you then have 3 years, I think, from the top of my head, to resell your other property and claim back the higher rate of stamp duty that you paid. So you would only have paid the standard rate.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. Right, Tony, I'm now going to ask you for your golden nugget of advice, your little tidbit of information for our viewers.
Okay, so let's have a look at the new PRA buy-to-let rules.
Right.
They really can be made to work to your advantage. By providing lenders with the right business plan, the right information, where you can clearly demonstrate that you understand what it means to run a professional property business, you will find lenders more than willing to make a good lending decision and give you the funds you need because you're growing a business. If you're trying to fudge around the edges, not take advice on tax, not put any planning in place, you're going to find it really, really hard. And as the Section 24 changes start to bite, the amount of tax you pay will rise and the amount of mortgage you can take will fall proportionately. So use the rules to your advantage, structure yourself as a professional property business, stop being the accidental landlord, and then you'll be able to find you can grow and sustain your portfolio well into the future.
Okay, and of course, seek all the proper advice.
Absolutely.
As much information as you can get.
Absolutely. You know, the Google is fine. It gives you lots of information about how to, but not why you should, and it doesn't give any context. So it's really important that you look at things in the round and make sure all of your professional advisors, specialist accountant, specialist lawyer, specialist financial advisor, are talking to each other as well as talking to you. That way you can present the best possible picture to a buy-to-let lender and get the best deals.
Okay. If you're just thinking about this, if you're just wanting to get as much information for yourself as possible, are there any websites or online forums which you think is a good place to start to get some information before you even start thinking about seeking advice?
Or even before seeking to become a landlord, for that
Yeah.
matter. National Landlords Association is pretty good. Yeah. They give a lot of independent, impartial, fact-based results. They've got a lot of recognised suppliers on their panel. So it's a really good place to start. Go along to all the various property meetings. NLA hold open meetings, as do a whole load of other property networking businesses. You have to be careful though. A lot of people are in the business of selling you courses.
Ah.
Now that may well lead to a gain in knowledge. Some are purely set up to sell you opportunities. But if you're new to this, NLA is a really good place to start. Do your research, talk to other landlords and understand why you're doing it in the first place.
Absolutely. Good piece of advice. Thank you very much, Tony. Right, that's all we have time for, but please don't go away because we will be back with more of your property related questions after this commercial break. Welcome back to Property Question Time. My name is Pia Jackson and today's expert panellists are Tony Gimple, Nicole Bremner and Simon Law. Now it's that most important part of the show where it's time for our tidbit of information, our piece of advice for our viewers. And Simon, it's your turn for your golden nugget.
I'm going to go with lease extensions for this one. So when a lessee needs a lease extension, quite often they will just go straight to the landlord and negotiate with the landlord about the lease extension, and the landlord won't tell them that there is another route in which you can get a lease extension, which is by serving a section 24 notice, which means that you can have a statutory lease extension and add 90 years to the current unexpired term of the lease, and also reduce the ground rent, more importantly, to nothing. Now, most landlords won't tell you this because it's not in their interest to do it, and they will therefore negotiate a lease extension, probably with an escalating ground rent, hopefully along the lines of RPI, because they're about the only ones that you can easily get a mortgage on at the moment, and certainly you need to avoid doubling ground rents. However, if you've been a qualifying tenant, so you've owned the property for 2 years, you can claim the statutory lease extension. It potentially will cost a little bit more because the landlord needs to be compensated on the ground rent, but there is a statutory formula to work out the premium.
Okay, so section 24. Yeah. Right, you've heard it here, important.
So if it's going to cost more, why not just go to the landlord?
Because the saleability going forward is probably going to be more than what it would, certainly with an escalating ground rent.
Right,
if you come to sell it, certainly you'll have no problems. And landlords will only generally renegotiate a 125 or a 99-year lease. Whereas this way, if you've still got 70 or 80 years and you're adding 90 years, you're getting a longer term as well.
Okay.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, Tony, it's time for your question, which is as follows. I've recently become a landlord as a result of my father passing away. I have all kinds of probate issues to deal with, but don't want to let my tenants down by just evicting them to make life easy by selling the properties. What are my tax implications, either way, selling or keeping the two houses?
Capital gains tax disappears on death in favour of inheritance tax, and whether the properties are kept or sold, inheritance tax will be due on his late father's estate. Going forward, income will be taxed at whatever his rate is, 20%, 40%, and if he's earning more than, or if he's earning between 100,000 and 123,000, he'll be paying tax at 60%. And if there are mortgages on the property, the amount of tax relief he gets on the mortgage interest will be reduced. So there isn't really enough information, to give a definitive answer. So much depends on where they are now, whether they're going to keep, whether they're going to sell. But it's certainly right not just to evict the tenants. That would be probably the wrong thing to do. Yeah. Work out the numbers, seek some advice, and then can make a business decision as to whether or not he wants to continue being a landlord, or tenants and toilets are just too much like hard work. It's a choice.
Tenants and toilets. Okay, Tony, thank you very much. Nicole, I have decided to buy my first property. What should I look out for when buying?
Wow, that is an open question.
Big question.
Very open question. First of all is where you're going to start looking, and narrow it down, get to know these areas, walk the streets, look on all the websites, look at what is being offered, what's available in the area, and also what's recently sold in that area. Just become a complete expert on the few streets or the area that you've chosen. If it's a very desirable area, maybe look to expand your circle, your viewing circle a bit as well. Some of the things to consider are schools and transport. These are the usual things you need to think about. Even if you don't have children right now, it's very important to think about schools from a saleability perspective, and also the fact that you may have children one day, or you may sell the property to someone who'll have children one day. So these are some things to look out for. When you've actually placed an offer on a property, you need to, first of all, have a mortgage in principle. So you need to go through that process. You also need to have a survey. Well, it's highly recommended that you have a survey of that particular property, because the surveyor can flag any potential issues within that sale. And then it's about becoming really up to speed with the conveyancing process and knowing how it all works, knowing when you need your deposit and when the completion will occur, and just knowing these different steps. Also thinking about what works might need to be done to the particular property that you're purchasing. Get some quotes already as soon as you've exchanged. Try and get access so that you can get some quotes from builders, so the moment you complete, you can have your builders come through and do the works as quickly as possible. So look, there are so many things you need to think about, but if you look at it systematically as a process, you will be able to narrow down those things and the various steps that you need to take.
Absolutely. And would you think that it is wise to always get an independent surveyor?
Yes, it's always better to have a surveyor that will act in your interest. So the bank will also instruct their own surveyor for evaluation, but you should get a homeowner's survey done, and that will flag up any potential issues in that property, and that will just give you peace of mind, or allow you to claim back from that survey if there are any issues that weren't flagged up in that survey. So definitely, if it's your first property, it's worth getting a survey.
Absolutely. And do you have any advice in terms of where somebody who's looking to buy their first home can go online to find out all the information of what they need to do in the whole process from start to finish, so they can give themselves an idea of what they're about to set themselves up for?
Often the search sites such as Rightmove, Zoopla, onthemarket.com, they've got some really good articles on there where you can look up the process, and they'll explain. They've got an education. Often we think of these websites as just looking for properties or prices, but they do have some educational articles on there as well. So look at those. Also just Google. A lot of the conveyancing firms have got knowledge libraries there where you can look up the processes as well, and have impartial advice about just the steps that need to be taken in order to purchase a property.
Okay.
Interesting, the same thing applies not just with buying your first residential property, but with buying your first buy-to-let property.
True.
Whilst, okay, the personal aesthetic can be removed from the argument, if people want to live in an area, then they'll want to rent in an area as well. But all of the same things apply, whether it's just your first home or whether it's your first buy-to-let. And on the survey side, if you're in any doubt about the property, if it's an older property, full structural survey will avoid a lot of nasty problems later on.
It's worth shelling out for, isn't it?
Yeah, just spending a hell of a lot of money and borrowing even more probably, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Simon, question for you. My landlord has put the house I rent in up for sale without giving me notice. Is this legal?
Yes, it is,
Yes.
is the short answer to that. The landlord is perfectly entitled to put the property on the market and not give the tenant notice. The fact that they haven't given the tenant notice is probably indicating that they're going to sell it with the tenant in place, so it's not necessarily something that the tenant needs to worry about. None of the rights change, but just because the landlord's put the property on the market, you've still got your tenancy agreement, assumingly under an assured short-hold tenancy, and all of the rights still stay the same. So it's not something I'd be over concerned about. I'm slightly surprised the landlord hasn't spoken to their tenant, because they're going to want cooperation with viewings, and the tenant just needs to check their tenancy agreement, because if there's nothing in there about allowing the landlord access for viewings, then technically they don't have to do that. Even if there is, the landlord should give them at least 24 hours notice of any viewing, and it needs to be at a time that's convenient for the tenant as well. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about it. If it does sell, the deposit will be transferred from the outgoing landlord to the incoming landlord, and the outgoing landlord will serve notice on the tenant of the new landlord with the new details. So it could be something and nothing.
Okay. Do you think it's worth approaching the landlord and just asking for a little bit of clarification on the matter?
Yeah,
Or
it's a good idea just to speak to them. Again, the property is going to be marketed probably online, so I'd possibly even look at that, and it should confirm that there's a tenant in place already, which again is an indicator that they're going to be selling it with the tenant in place.
Okay. All right. Super. Thank you very much, Simon. Okay. I think we've got time for one more golden nugget. Nicole, are you ready?
I am indeed.
Okay.
And I'd like to talk about purchasing properties collectively. So a lot of people get together as friends and decide that they want to purchase their first investment property. And this can seem like a good idea, but it can also be a big, big problem. Because generally, if a group of people are investing together, it becomes a collective investment scheme, which is actually regulated by the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority. And it comes with all sorts of issues as far as compliance and potential responsibilities around that. So it actually is a compliant activity, and you need to make sure there are proper structures in place so that you don't fall foul of those legislations. I think that you probably know more about this than I do.
Yeah, not so much from the regulated perspective, but just the practical issues. Are you going to buy the property as joint tenants where everybody owns the same 100%, or are you going to buy it as tenants in common where you each own a defined share? What happens when one of you dies? What happens if all signatures are required and one of you is not quite dead but not quite alive? Okay, the last people you want in your life is the court of protection. It's unaccountable. It used to be known as the Masters of Lunacy, to give you some idea of its heritage. It's the worst kind of civil service you'll ever come across. What happens if the project doesn't work out? How are you going to divide the rents? Have you all got wills? What about the tax situation? One of you a higher rate taxpayer, one of you is not a taxpayer. Are you going to do it in a limited company structure or something else? So you've got to work out whether it's a good idea to do in the first place. Do you actually like and can you trust the people, your friends, who you're going in with? And always look at the worst first. You know, we're programmed as a species to always ignore negative information and expect the best result. Well, when it comes to property, it's really easy to get a poor result. So understand what you're doing, seek special advice, and watch out for the FCA. You don't want them in your lives. Right. And it's regulation a lot of the time which is really difficult to comply with, and you can find yourself on the wrong end of something.
Yeah, it's really important to look at the policy statement 13.3, and that will go over what is a collective investment scheme, because there are certain rules. If you're family, then it doesn't apply, or if you're very long-term friends, then perhaps if you can demonstrate that you're long-term friends, it doesn't apply. But yes, have a look at that policy statement 13.3, and if you are in doubt, please go and see a specialist solicitor who deals with that.
All right, super. Well, as with everything, it's get as much information and seek advice. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Sadly, that is all that we have time for today. But please do keep sending in your questions. You can send them in via the website property-tv.co.uk or via email info@property-tv.co.uk. A huge thank you to our fantastic panellists. Thank you very much indeed. My name is Pia Jackson. You have been watching Property Question Time. See you soon.